At my granddaughter's baby shower in my own son's backyard, my daughter-in-law held up the blanket I had spent 4 months making, smiled wide for her camera, and dropped it straight into the trash can by the gift table. 40 people watched her do it. Nobody stopped her, not even my son. I want you to remember that detail, because it matters later. 40 people, and not one hand reached out. My name is Margaret. Everyone calls me Maggie. I am 68 years old, and for 41 years I was a tailor. I have made wedding dresses for brides who cried when they saw themselves in the mirror. I have hemmed funeral suits for men who could not stop shaking long enough to stand still. My hands know thread the way some people know prayer. So when I tell you I sewed something with my whole heart, I want you to understand I am not exaggerating. I do not exaggerate. I am too old for that. The blanket was pale yellow, soft as a held breath, with little ducks stitched along the border. It took me 4 months. My fingers do not move the way they used to. Arthritis has taken some of the speed from me, though it has not taken the will. What nobody at that party knew, what I had not even told my own son, was that the blanket had a second layer. A hidden pocket, sewn flat and invisible, stitched into the lining where no eye would ever think to look. Inside that pocket was something my late husband Frank left behind before he died. Something he asked me to give to his first grandchild, and only his first grandchild, when the time was right. Vanessa did not know any of this. She only saw a plain yellow blanket without a designer tag, sitting next to gift bags from stores she could pronounce in front of a camera. She held it up. She laughed a little, the way people laugh when they think they are being clever instead of cruel. She said it looked like something from a thrift store. She said the baby deserved better than handmade. Then she threw it in the trash. I did not say a word. I want you to remember that too. I did not say a word. Not because I had nothing to say, because some things are not meant to be defended in front of an audience. I picked my purse up off my lap. I stood up slowly, the way my knees make me do everything now. I walked to that trash can in front of all those people, and I took the blanket out with both hands, like I was lifting something injured. Nobody clapped. Nobody apologized. My son looked at his shoes. 3 days later, my phone rang at 11 at night, and the voice on the other end was not calm. It was my son, and he was not asking about the party. He was asking what was sewn inside that blanket. This is what happened when my whole family finally found out what she had thrown away. I should tell you a little about who I am, because the rest of this story will not make sense unless you understand something about old women like me, the ones people look past in grocery stores, the ones who get spoken to a little too loud and a little too slow, as if age took our hearing along with our patience. I was born in 1958 in a small house with a coal stove and 4 sisters, and I learned to sew before I learned to ride a bicycle. My mother used to say a needle in the hand was worth more than money in the bank, because money runs out and skill does not. I did not understand her then. I understand her now, in my bones, especially the bones in my hands, which ache most mornings before they ever pick up a spool of thread. I worked 41 years as a tailor, not a hobby. A trade. I supported my family with these hands when Frank's factory cut hours 3 years running. I let out waistbands for proud men too embarrassed to admit they'd grown. I shortened hems for brides at 6 in the morning before their own weddings, my mouth full of pins, because some things cannot wait until a more convenient hour. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because I need you to understand. I know the difference between something cheap and something cheaply made to look expensive. I have held silk that cost $300 a yard and felt nothing in it. No story, no weight, just shine. And I have held a baby's first sock, knitted crooked by a grandmother with shaking hands, and felt more love in that single crooked stitch than in an entire department store. People who have not worked with their hands for a living sometimes cannot tell the difference. They think value comes from a label, from a logo, from what a thing costs at a register. They have never sat at 2 in the morning, eyes burning, fixing a single seam because it was not quite right, because the person receiving it deserved it to be exactly right. I am not bitter about this. I want to be clear about that. I do not think less of people who buy instead of make. Buying is its own kind of love, when it's honest. But I have learned over 68 years that the people who are loudest about quality are rarely the ones who understand it. The ones who truly understand quality usually stay quiet. They just make the thing and let it speak for itself. That is what I tried to do with that blanket. I want you to remember something about old women, something Vanessa did not know that day, standing by that trash can with her phone raised and her smile practiced for an audience she'd never met. She saw an old woman holding a plain yellow blanket, a nuisance maybe, a relic from a generation that didn't matter anymore. She had no idea what was sewn inside it. She had no idea that the woman she was humiliating in front of 40 people had spent 4 decades making things with her hands that outlasted everything bought to replace them. She thought I was just an old woman with a blanket. She had no idea what I had sewn inside it. I met Frank Doyle in 1979 at a church potluck where he ate 3 plates of my sister's potato salad and then told everyone, with a perfectly straight face, that he'd made it himself. I found out years later he did that on purpose, just to get me to walk over and correct him. He was that kind of patient. He would wait an entire evening for a 5-minute conversation, if he thought it was worth having. We married the following spring. I wore a dress I made myself, because even then I could not imagine paying someone else to do something I knew how to do with my own hands. Frank worked at the same factory for 36 years, foreman eventually, though he never acted like a man with a title. He used to say titles were for people who needed reminding of who they were. He never needed reminding. He knew exactly who he was every single day of his life, and that kind of certainty is rare. I have met very few people who carry it. He was not a man who said, "I love you" often. That was not how he was raised, and I never held it against him. Instead, he showed it in ways that took me years to fully understand. He fixed the porch step before I ever mentioned it was loose. He warmed my side of the bed in winter by lying there first, then moving over without a word when I came in. He drove 40 minutes out of his way every Friday to buy bread from the one bakery I liked and never once mentioned the detour. Frank believed in slow things. He used to say, "Money spent fast disappears fast, but money saved, slow becomes something solid, something you can stand on." He believed the same was true of love, of trust, of almost everything that mattered. He had a line he repeated so often I could finish it in my sleep. Whenever someone in the family wanted something quick, a fast loan, a fast fix, a fast answer, Frank would set down whatever he was holding, look at them steady, and say, "Time pays interest on patience." I want you to remember that line. It comes back later, and when it does, I need you to feel the weight of it the way I did. Frank was diagnosed in the autumn of 2019. Pancreas. The doctor used careful words, the kind doctors use when they are trying not to say the real number out loud. Frank did not flinch. He asked one question. How much time did he have to get his affairs in order? And when the doctor answered, Frank nodded once, like a man confirming a delivery date, and then he went home and started working. He spent his last 8 months doing something I did not fully understand until much later. He was quiet about it, the way he was quiet about everything that mattered most. I thought he was simply tired. I thought the cancer was taking the talk out of him the way it took the weight from his shoulders. I did not know he was building something small enough to hide and important enough to last. Frank Doyle died on a Tuesday in June, with my hand in his and the porch step he'd fixed still holding strong outside our window. He went quietly, the way he did most things. Before he closed his eyes for the last time, he asked me for one promise. He asked it so softly, I had to lean in to hear him. He asked me to wait for our first grandchild. And when that day came, he told me exactly what to do, something I did not understand yet, something that would not make sense to me for almost 2 more years. I promised him. I would have promised him anything in that moment. I did not know yet that keeping that promise would mean standing in front of 40 people, 3 years later, watching a trash can swallow the last thing my husband ever made for our family. I need to tell you something now, and I need you to keep it to yourself for a little while, the way I had to keep it to myself for 3 long years. Nobody in my family knew what I am about to tell you. Not Daniel, not Vanessa, not a single soul at that baby shower. You are about to know more than everyone in that backyard combined. In his last 8 months, Frank was not just resting. He was working, in his own quiet way, on something he never once mentioned out loud. He had always kept a separate savings account, one from before we were even married, money he called his patience fund. A little each month, for over 40 years, sitting untouched, growing slow the way Frank believed everything worth having should grow. He never spent from it. Not for the car when it broke down, not for the roof when it leaked. He said that money was not for emergencies. He said it was for something that hadn't been born yet. By the time Frank passed, that fund had grown into a little more than $200,000. He did not leave it to me. He did not leave it to Daniel. He left specific, careful instructions, written in his own slow handwriting, the handwriting of a man who pressed too hard on the pen, that the money belonged to his first grandchild and to no one else, not to be touched, not to be borrowed against, not to be managed by anyone until that child turned 18. He did not trust banks alone to hold something this important. Frank never fully trusted paper that lived only in a filing cabinet. He wanted something physical, something close, something that could not be quietly moved or quietly forgotten the way bank accounts sometimes are when families get complicated, when marriages end, when people get desperate. So in his last working months, weak as he was, Frank had a small fireproof legal document, a notarized letter naming the child as sole beneficiary, along with the account details, sealed inside a thin waterproof pouch. And he asked me to hide that pouch somewhere no one would think to look. Somewhere ordinary. Somewhere beneath suspicion. Somewhere that looked like nothing at all. He asked me to sew it into something I would make with my own hands, for the baby, when the time came. That is what was hidden inside the lining of that pale yellow blanket. Not loose cash, not jewelry. A legal claim to $200,000 and a letter from a dying man to a grandchild he would never meet, explaining exactly why he waited, why he saved, why he chose to hide something so large inside something so small and plain. Frank's last line in that letter, the one I read so many times the paper softened at the fold, said this: "If anyone ever calls this blanket worthless, hold on to it tighter. The people who cannot see value are usually the ones who need to be taught it most." I did not know, when I wrapped that blanket in plain brown paper with no bow, no ribbon, nothing to announce its importance, that I was carrying my husband's entire careful, patient plan into a backyard full of people who valued logos over love. And that is what she was holding, smiling for her camera when she called it cheap. I want to tell you about the making of that blanket, because I think people who have never sewn something with their own hands do not understand what the word handmade actually costs. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in February, 3 months before the baby shower, 6 months after Daniel told us Vanessa was pregnant. I went to the fabric store the way I always do, alone, unhurried, running my fingers across bolt after bolt until something stopped me. I found a pale yellow cotton flannel blend, soft as a held breath, the kind of fabric that feels like it was already loved before you bought it. I bought thread the color of butter and a spool of pale blue for the duck stitching, because Frank used to say ducks were the only animal that looked dignified even when they were clumsy. He thought that was funny. I always did too. I set up at my kitchen table, the same table where I have hemmed 1,000 things over 40 years, the surface scarred with tiny pin marks only I would ever notice. My hands do not move quickly anymore. What once took me an evening now takes me 3. The arthritis sits in my knuckles like a tenant who never leaves, and some mornings I cannot make a fist until I've run my hands under warm water for a full minute. I worked on that blanket a little every day, sometimes only 20 minutes before my fingers gave out. 4 months, for something another woman would unwrap in 4 seconds. I cried twice while making it, not from the pain in my hands, from missing Frank. The first time was when I cut the lining fabric, and I thought about how he used to sit across from me at this same table some nights, not talking, just keeping me company while I worked. the way some people read and others simply sit near the people they love. I missed that so much it took my breath for a moment. The second time was when I sewed the hidden pocket itself. I had practiced the technique on scrap fabric first, a small flat seam along the inside lining, invisible from both sides, the kind of stitch only another tailor would notice, and even then, only if they were looking for it. I slid the waterproof pouch inside, smoothed it flat so it would not bulge, and closed the seam with small, even stitches, the same stitches I once used to hem wedding gowns for brides who never knew how much of themselves I put into the hour before they walked down an aisle. I remember sitting back afterward and pressing my palm flat against that section of fabric, feeling nothing through it. No bulge, no clue, just a blanket. I thought about what Frank had asked of me, and for a moment I worried. What if no one understood? What if it just looked plain? What if after everything he saved, after everything he planned, someone looked at this blanket and saw nothing worth keeping? I did not let myself dwell there long. Frank trusted this plan. I trusted Frank. I stitched small yellow ducks along the border last because I wanted the baby to have something cheerful to look at, something that did not carry the weight of what was hidden beneath it. A baby should not have to feel a burden in her blanket, only warmth. When it was finished, I held it up to the kitchen window light and turned it over twice, checking the seams the way I check every piece of work before it leaves my hands. It looked, to anyone who didn't know better, like a simple homemade gift, sweet, plain, unremarkable. I did not put it in a gift bag with tissue paper and a bow. I wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with plain string, the same way Frank used to wrap my birthday gifts, because he believed presentation should never outshine what was actually inside. I wrapped it plainly because I thought love did not need a logo. I want to tell you about Vanessa now, and I want to do it fairly because I have thought about her often since that day, and I do not believe she woke up that morning planning to hurt anyone. I think that matters. I think it is important to understand her, not just hate her. Vanessa married my son 4 years ago. She is 33, sharp-dressed, always camera-ready, the kind of woman who checks a mirror before checking a doorbell. She runs a small online business selling home decor, the kind with soft beige walls and gold accents, the kind that looks the same in every photo because that sameness is the entire point. She has nearly 30,000 people who watch her life unfold in careful, curated squares. I do not say this to mock her. I have come to understand that Vanessa grew up the way some people grow up hungry, except what she was hungry for was never food. It was proof. Proof that she mattered. Proof that she had arrived somewhere her own mother never reached. Her mother, from what Daniel told me once, judged nearly everything by its price tag. A meal was only good if it cost enough. A house was only respectable if the right people lived on the street. I think Vanessa absorbed that lesson so early and so deeply that she never questioned it, the way you never question the temperature of water you've swum in your whole life. So when Vanessa looks at a gift, she does not see the hours behind it. She sees the brand on it. She sees whether it will photograph well. She sees whether it will make her appear, to 30,000 strangers, like a woman whose life is as polished as her photos suggest. There is one afternoon I keep coming back to, a few weeks before the shower, that I did not think much of at the time. I had driven over with a small swatch of the yellow flannel, just to show her what I was working on, the way you'd show a daughter-in-law anything you were excited about and hoped she might be excited about too. She held the fabric for maybe 4 seconds. She rubbed it once between her fingers, the way you'd test a towel at a discount store, and then she set it down on her kitchen island, next to a gift she'd already received from a coworker, a cream-colored swaddle set still in its box, with a small embossed logo on the corner. "That's so sweet of you, Maggie," she said. And she meant it, in the moment. I believe that. But have you seen these organic ones? They're temperature regulated. The pediatrician at my prenatal class actually recommended this exact brand. I told her Handmade cotton breathes just fine, that babies had been wrapped in homemade blankets for thousands of years before anyone invented a temperature-regulated anything. I said it lightly, the way you say something you believe but don't want to fight about. She laughed, not unkindly, and said, "Well, sure, but this one has actual research behind it." Then she picked the swaddle set back up, turned it over once to find the best light from her window, and took a photo of it for her page before I had even left the kitchen. She never photographed the swatch of yellow flannel sitting right beside it. I did not think much of it that day. I told myself she was busy, distracted, thinking about the registry and the nursery and 100 other things expectant mothers think about. I did not yet understand that I had just watched, in miniature, exactly what would happen 3 weeks later in front of 40 people. Only this time, there would be no quiet kitchen island to soften it, no easy laugh to smooth it over. In the weeks leading up to the baby shower, Vanessa planned everything the way she plans her online posts, with intention, with aesthetic, with an eye toward how it would all look afterward, not just how it would feel in the moment. She picked a color palette, sage green and cream, she told me, twice, as if I might forget. She hired a photographer for 2 hours. She ordered a custom backdrop with the baby's name in gold script, though the baby had not yet been born, and the name could still, technically, have changed. She told Daniel, more than once, that she wanted gifts displayed intentionally for photos. She wanted things that matched. She wanted the gift table itself to look like something worth posting. I did not know, when I wrapped my blanket in plain brown paper, that I was about to walk into a stage set designed entirely around appearance. A stage where anything plain, anything without a label facing outward, would stand out as a flaw rather than a gift. Vanessa was not planning to humiliate me specifically. I want to be fair about that too. I do not think she sat at her vanity that morning rehearsing cruelty. I think in her mind, she was simply protecting an image she had spent years building, an image she did not realize was built on sand instead of stone. She was about to prove, in front of 40 people and one careless camera, that she could recognize a brand from across a room, but she could not recognize love sitting quietly in her own 2 hands. I need to tell you about my son now, and this is harder for me than telling you about Vanessa, because you can be fair to a stranger more easily than you can be fair to your own child. Daniel is 39. He has his father's eyes and my stubbornness, though the stubbornness in him shows up differently than it did in me. Mine made me work. His makes him quiet. He was a good boy growing up. Not perfect. He broke a window once with a baseball and blamed it on wind for 2 straight days, which still makes me laugh when I think of it. But good. Soft-hearted. The kind of boy who cried at the end of movies and never apologized for it. What I did not see clearly until much later was that Daniel's softness had a cost. He hated conflict the way some people hate heights. Not dislike, real fear, the kind that sits in your stomach before you've even said a word. As a boy, that meant he let his sister win arguments she had no business winning. As a man, it meant something heavier. Daniel loved Vanessa. I want to be clear about that, because I never want this story to sound like I am asking you to choose sides between my son and his marriage. He loved her, and in many ways she was good for him. She pushed him to want more for himself, to ask for raises he was too nervous to ask for, to speak up in rooms where he used to stay silent. But Daniel had a habit, one I noticed slowly over the 4 years of their marriage, of going quiet exactly when his mother needed him loudest. I remember a Thanksgiving, 2 years before all this happened, when Vanessa made a small comment about my stuffing being a little old-fashioned compared to some recipe she'd found online. It was nothing, really, the kind of comment that rolls off most people. But I noticed Daniel's eyes flicker toward me, then away, then down to his plate. He did not defend the stuffing. He did not defend me. He simply ate faster, the way people eat when they want a moment to end. I told myself it was nothing. Husbands do not need to defend their mother's stuffing. But there were other moments like that. Small ones. A comment here, an eye roll there, always softened just enough that defending me would have seemed like overreacting. And every time, Daniel chose silence. Not cruelty. Never cruelty from him. Just absence at exactly the moment presence mattered. I think now, looking back, that Daniel believed his silence was kindness. He believed that staying quiet kept the peace, kept Vanessa happy, kept the family running smooth on the surface. He did not yet understand that some silences cost more than the conflicts they avoid. In the days before the baby shower, I mentioned to Daniel, almost in passing, how much work I'd put into the blanket. I did not tell him what was hidden inside. That secret belonged only to Frank and to me until the right moment. But I told him it mattered to me. I told him it was special. He smiled and said, "She'll love it, Mom," in the easy way people say things they hope are true more than things they know are true. He knew his wife well enough to guess how that gift might be received in a room full of cameras and curated decor. He knew enough, in some quiet corner of himself, to have a word with her beforehand, to ask her to be gentle, to simply say, "Be kind to my mother's gift, whatever it looks like." He said nothing. He knew enough to stop her. That is what hurt most later. The baby shower was held on a Saturday in May in Daniel and Vanessa's backyard, and I want to describe it to you carefully because the setting matters. It tells you everything about the room I was about to walk into. Vanessa had transformed that backyard the way she transforms everything, slowly, deliberately, with an eye toward how it would look through a phone screen, rather than through a human eye standing in the middle of it. There was a sage green and cream balloon arch curving over the gift table. The colors repeated in the tablecloth, the napkins, even the little paper straws standing in a mason jar of lemonade nobody actually drank. The custom backdrop she'd ordered weeks earlier hung behind a velvet armchair where she would sit to open gifts. Gold script spelling out Lily, the name they'd finally settled on, surrounded by hand-painted florals. A photographer moved through the crowd with a long lens, the kind that makes ordinary backyard chairs look like something out of a magazine. I noticed her crouching at odd angles more than once, chasing a shot rather than a moment. The air smelled like cut grass and citrus candles, the kind Vanessa always burns even outdoors. And underneath that, faintly, the sweetness of a sheet cake someone had set on a side table, frosted in the same sage and cream as everything else. Even the cake matched the color palette. I remember thinking, with a small private smile, that Frank would have found that very funny. The guest list was mostly Vanessa's side. Co-workers from her old marketing job, 2 women from her prenatal class, a handful of cousins I'd met only once or twice at weddings. Younger faces mostly. Polished. The kind of women who arrive at a backyard party in heels that were clearly chosen before comfort was considered. I felt it the moment I walked through the side gate. Not unwelcome exactly, just out of place, the way a single off-key note sounds in an otherwise tuned room. I was wearing the same blue cardigan I'd worn to a dozen family events over the years, comfortable, familiar, nothing anyone would call fashionable. I caught 1 or 2 glances, not unkind, just the quick, assessing kind people give when deciding where someone fits. A young woman near the drink table, one of Vanessa's co-workers, I think, leaned toward her friend as I passed and said, not cruelly, just carelessly, the way people talk when they assume no one older is really listening. "Is that the grandmother? She's so cute, that cardigan." Her friend laughed, not unkindly either, and said, "Very grandma core." I did not know what that phrase meant. I still do not, fully. But I understood the tone well enough. I found a folding chair near the back, close enough to see, far enough not to be in anyone's photographs. Daniel waved at me from across the yard, busy carrying a cooler, and mouthed "Thank you for coming," the way you'd thank a guest rather than greet your own mother. I told myself he was simply distracted hosting. The gift table sat near the center of the yard, and I watched it fill slowly over the first hour. Gift bags with tissue paper fanned out just so, each one seemingly arranged by hand to catch the light a certain way. A large box wrapped in foil paper that turned out to be a stroller attachment. A diaper bag in soft leather that someone mentioned, loud enough for nearby ears, cost nearly $400. I heard the words calfskin and investment piece in the same breath. The way some people now talk about diaper bags, the way my mother used to talk about good china. Each gift, once placed on the table, seemed to get its own small moment of attention. A comment, a compliment, sometimes a photo taken by a guest who wanted to be seen giving something impressive. My blanket sat near the edge of that table, wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with ordinary string, no bow, no ribbon, no tissue paper fanned out to announce itself. Next to the foil-wrapped stroller box and the leather diaper bag, it looked, I will admit, almost like a mistake, like something left over from a different, smaller occasion that had wandered onto the wrong table. I sat with that feeling for a while. I want to be honest with you. For a moment, I doubted myself. I kept glancing at that brown paper package, plain among all that shine, and a small, unkind voice in my own head asked whether I should have wrapped it differently. Bought a bag? Tied a ribbon? Made it look like it belonged among things with price tags still half visible under the tissue paper. I caught myself smoothing my skirt over my knees, the way I do when I'm nervous, a habit I've had since I was a girl waiting outside a principal's office. 68 years old, and some habits never leave you. Then I remembered Frank's voice, steady as it always was. What lasts is usually quiet. I told myself the wrapping did not matter. What mattered was sewn inside, where no eye could reach. I folded my hands in my lap and made myself sit straight, the way my own mother taught me to sit in church. Not because anyone was watching, but because some things you do for yourself to remind your own spine of who you are. The gift opening began a little after 2 o'clock. Vanessa settled into the velvet armchair beneath her gold-scripted backdrop. The photographer crouched at the perfect angle, the crowd gathering close with their phones raised like a small forest of glowing rectangles. One gift after another came open. Tissue paper rustled. Vanessa gasped on cue for the camera, every single time, whether the gift was a $400 diaper bag or a small set of burp cloths. "Oh my gosh, you guys, this is exactly what I registered for," she said, holding up a baby monitor still in its box, turning it just slightly so the brand name faced the lens. Polite applause followed each unwrapping, the kind of applause people give because it's expected, not because they're moved. The pile beside her chair grew. The pile on the table shrank. Then there were only 2 gifts left, one envelope and mine. Vanessa reached for the envelope first. I remember being glad of that in a small way, because it meant I had a few more seconds before my own heart started pounding the way it pounds now just telling you this. The envelope held a check from her aunt, a generous one, and Vanessa made the sound she'd been making all afternoon, the gasp, the hand over her chest, the "you guys, I can't," and the crowd clapped, warm and easy, the way you clap for something you understand. Then she reached for mine. She lifted the plain brown package with 2 fingers, almost the way you'd lift something you weren't sure was clean. I noticed that. I don't think anyone else did, but I have spent 41 years noticing how people hold fabric, and I noticed. "Oh," she said, turning it over once, looking for a card, a tag, anything that might tell her what to expect. "This one's from Maggie." A few heads turned toward me. I kept my hands folded in my lap. My heart had already started its slow climb, the way it does sometimes before a fall. I can sense coming but cannot yet name. She pulled the string loose and peeled back the brown paper, and the yellow flannel came into view, soft and plain under the afternoon light. The little blue ducks stitched along the border catching no shine at all, no logo, nothing for a camera to admire. There was a pause, not a long one, just long enough. "Oh, it's a blanket," she said, holding it up by 2 corners, letting it unfold in the air the way you'd shake out a beach towel. A few guests laughed softly, not at anything specific yet, just at the small awkward gap where a gasp should have been. One of the women near the front, I learned later her name was Brooke, one of Vanessa's co-workers, a woman I'd never spoken a single word to in my life, leaned toward the woman beside her and said, just loud enough, "Did somebody's grandma make that?" She wasn't being cruel either, I think. She was simply narrating the moment the way people narrate things for an audience that isn't fully paying attention yet. The woman beside her giggled and said, "It's giving thrift store," and they both went back to their phones. I felt that comment land somewhere under my ribs, quiet and precise, the way a pin finds skin before you've even seen it coming. I leaned forward slightly. "I made that myself, sweetheart," I said. "It took me. It's so soft," she said over me, not unkindly, just quickly, the way people talk when they're already thinking about what comes next. She ran her hand across it once, the same 4-second assessment she'd given the fabric swatch weeks earlier. "Did you get this at, like, a craft fair?" "I made it," I said again, "by hand. I sewed it myself, over the winter for—" "That's so sweet," she said, and smiled toward the camera, not toward me. "Old school, very vintage." A small laugh rippled through the women nearest her, the kind of laugh that isn't sure yet what it's laughing at, but is willing to laugh anyway. I want to tell you what was happening inside me in that exact moment, because from the outside, I imagine I looked calm, almost untouched. I was not untouched. Some part of me, the part that still remembers being a young bride hemming her own wedding dress, wanted to stand up and say, "Do you have any idea what is in your hands right now?" Another part of me, older and more tired, simply wanted to take the blanket back gently and go sit in my car until the party ended. I did neither. I sat very still, the way I taught myself to sit still through 41 years of customers who didn't always speak kindly to the woman holding the pins. I tried once more. "There's something I want to tell you about it, Vanessa. Before you, I just worry it's not breathable enough for her," she said, talking over me a second time, holding the blanket out at arm's length now, examining it the way you'd examine something you were already deciding to discard. "These flannel ones can run really warm. My pediatrician was really specific about temperature regulation." "It's cotton flannel," I said. "Babies have used it for—" "Right, but the ones from the registry are like medical-grade breathable," she said. "And here is the part I want you to hear clearly, the part that still sits in my chest like a stone." She said it kindly, not cruelly. Kindly, the way you'd correct a child who'd made an honest, harmless mistake. She stood up from the velvet chair, the blanket still in her hand, and walked the few steps toward the small trash bin set up near the gift table, the one meant for wrapping paper, ribbon, the debris of unwrapping. And she dropped it in. Not through exactly, not violent, just released, the way you'd drop a used napkin. That gentleness, I think, was almost worse. "Okay, last one's done," she announced to the yard, already turning back toward the chair, toward the photographer, toward the next moment she wanted captured. A few people clapped. Someone said, "She's going to be so spoiled," and laughed. I sat very still. I looked at my son. Daniel was standing near the cooler, exactly where he'd been standing all afternoon. He was looking at the trash bin. He was looking at me. For one full second, maybe two, I watched something move behind his eyes. His mouth opened, just slightly, the way a mouth does right before words arrive. I have wondered so many times since what he was about to say. Mom made that herself. Or maybe just, hey. One word would have been enough. One word would have changed something. The word never came. His mouth closed again, and he looked down at his shoes, the same way he'd looked down at his plate that Thanksgiving 2 years before. He said nothing. 40 people in that yard, and the only sound was the photographer's shutter, clicking twice, capturing Vanessa's bright, easy smile as she settled back into her chair beneath the gold letters spelling Lily. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I sat with my hands folded for one more moment, long enough to be sure of myself, and then I stood up. That was not the moment I lost the blanket. That was the moment I saw everyone clearly. I stood up slowly, the way my knees make me do everything now, and I felt 40 pairs of eyes shift toward me, curious, a little uncomfortable, the way people get when they sense a moment turning into something they didn't sign up to watch. I did not look at Vanessa. I did not look at Daniel. I walked the short distance to that small trash bin, past the balloon arch, past the gift table now nearly empty, and I reached in with both hands and lifted the blanket out the way you'd lift something injured from water. Carefully, gently, as if it might still feel what had just happened to it. A few people near me went quiet. I heard someone whisper, "Oh no," though I couldn't tell you if it was meant for me or for the awkwardness of the moment itself. I folded the blanket once, lengthwise, the way I always fold finished work, smoothing the fabric flat with the side of my hand. I did not brush off invisible crumbs or make a show of cleaning it. There was nothing on it to clean. I simply folded it the way you fold something you intend to keep. "Maggie, I didn't mean," Vanessa started, and I could hear, even then, the first thread of uncertainty in her voice, the sound of someone realizing a room had shifted, but not yet understanding why. I held up one hand, not sharply, just enough. "It's all right," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected, steadier than I felt. "I should be getting home soon anyway." That was all I said. I did not explain. I did not defend the blanket, or myself, or the 4 months it took me to make it. Some part of me wanted to stand in that backyard and tell every single person there exactly what they had just watched be thrown away. But another part of me, the part Frank spent 39 years teaching me to trust, knew that explaining myself to a room that had already decided what it saw would not change a single mind in it. Some truths are not meant to be handed out for free. Some truths have to be earned later in their own time. I picked up my purse from the folding chair. I tucked the blanket carefully into the crook of my arm, the way you'd carry something fragile or something sleeping. I walked toward the side gate, and I felt the yard go quiet behind me in that particular way a room goes quiet when people aren't sure whether to keep talking. Nobody called after me. Nobody followed. Near the gate, an older woman I didn't recognize, someone's grandmother maybe, or a neighbor wandered over for cake, touched my arm lightly as I passed. She didn't say much. Just, "That was a real shame," quiet enough that no one else heard it. I nodded at her, grateful in a way I didn't have words for in that moment, and kept walking. It is a strange thing, how one small kindness from a stranger can hold you up more than you'd expect, right when you need holding up most. I passed close to Daniel on my way out. Close enough that he could have said something, even then. Close enough that I gave him one more second, the way you give someone one more chance without ever admitting out loud that you're doing it. He said, "Bye, Mom. Thanks for coming," in the same tone he'd use with any departing guest. I did not answer. I am not proud of that, but I am not ashamed of it either. Some silences are honest. I let myself out the side gate and walked the half block to where I'd parked, and the whole way there, my mind kept circling back to the same small, stubborn thought. He knows what handmade things mean to me. He has known his whole life. I thought of all the years I'd hemmed his school pants, mended his jacket pockets, sewn name tags into his camp clothes by hand because the iron-on kind never lasted. I wondered when, exactly, all of that had stopped registering as anything more than background noise to him. A mother's habit, rather than a mother's love made visible. I got into my car. I set the blanket gently on the passenger seat, the way you'd set something you were driving to a hospital. I started the engine. I checked my mirror. I pulled out onto the street with my hands steady on the wheel, my back straight, my breathing even. I made it 3 blocks before I had to pull into a church parking lot, put the car in park, and finally let myself feel everything I had been holding still for the last 20 minutes. I gripped the steering wheel hard enough that my knuckles ached, and I let the tears come the way I hadn't allowed them to in that backyard, full and unguarded, with no one watching and nothing left to prove. I did not cry until I reached the car. I drove home that evening with the blanket sitting on the passenger seat the whole way, and I want to tell you, it felt strange having it there beside me, like a quiet passenger who'd had a hard day too. When I got inside, I did not unpack my purse or change out of my good blouse the way I normally would after an event. I went straight to my sewing room, the small back bedroom that used to be Daniel's, and I sat down at my work table with the blanket in my lap. I ran my fingers along the lining until I felt it. That small, flat ridge where the hidden seam sat, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. I had checked on it perhaps 100 times since Frank passed, the way you check a lock on a door you already know is locked, just to be sure, just to feel the certainty in your own hands. It was still there, still flat, still sealed, still safe. Whatever had happened in that backyard, the secret itself had not been touched. Vanessa had thrown away a blanket. She had not thrown away what was inside it. That, at least, gave me something steady to hold on to that night. I sat there for a long while, running my thumb over that small ridge, thinking about Frank, thinking about his slow handwriting on that letter, thinking about how strange it was that something so important could survive a moment so careless simply because no one knew enough to look closer. I did not call Daniel that night. I did not call anyone. I made myself a cup of tea I barely drank, and I went to bed earlier than usual, the way you do after a day that has taken more out of you than you expected it to. What I did not know, what I could not have known, sitting alone in my quiet house, was that the story of that afternoon was already moving without me. My niece Carol, my sister's daughter, had been at the shower. She is the kind of woman who means well, but cannot hold a piece of news in her mouth for more than an hour before it has to come out somewhere. She called my sister that same evening, mostly to gossip about the party, about the decor, about who wore what. Somewhere in that conversation, she mentioned the blanket. She mentioned the trash bin. She mentioned, almost as an aside, something she'd overheard secondhand from another cousin who'd heard it from Frank's old card-playing friend, years before any of this happened, that Frank had once joked, late one night over cards, about the safest place in the world to hide something is somewhere nobody thinks to look twice. Carol did not know what that meant. She simply repeated it the way people repeat things that sound interesting, without understanding their weight. My sister, half paying attention, mentioned it to her husband. Her husband, who had once worked alongside Frank at the factory, paused over his coffee the next morning and said something that should never have been said so lightly. "You don't think the old man hid something in there, do you?" Frank was exactly the type. It was a joke, almost. The kind of joke people say because it sounds clever, not because they believe it. But jokes travel fast in families, especially ones with a grain of truth buried inside them. By Sunday evening, less than 24 hours after that backyard had gone quiet around me, the joke had reached someone who did not take it as a joke at all. It reached Daniel. I do not know exactly how the words were said to him, or in what tone, or how much he understood right away. I only know that something in those secondhand words landed on my son the way a single spark lands on dry grass, quiet at first, and then suddenly not quiet at all. I was sitting in my kitchen Sunday night, drying the last of my dinner dishes, when my phone began to ring. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was nearly 9 at night, and I am an old woman who likes her quiet evenings, and I assumed it was Carol calling to relive every detail of the party I had no interest in reliving. But it was Daniel's name on the screen, and something in me, some old mother's instinct that never fully retires, told me to pick it up. "Mom." His voice came through before I'd even said hello. It was tight. Strange. Not the easy, distracted voice from the backyard the day before. "Daniel, what's wrong?" "Is the blanket still—" He stopped, started again. "Did you bring it home with you? The blanket, from the shower." "It's right here," I said, glancing toward the sewing room where it sat folded on my work table. "Why?" There was a long pause on the other end, long enough that I could hear him breathing, the way you breathe when you're trying to steady yourself before saying something you're afraid of. "Carol said something to Aunt Linda," he said finally, "about Dad, about hiding things. I didn't think anything of it at first, but then I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I just— Mom, is there something in that blanket?" I did not answer right away. 41 years of sewing has taught me that some silences need to be respected, not rushed past, and I think some part of me also needed that pause, just for myself, before I said out loud what I had carried alone for nearly 3 years. "Yes," I said quietly, "there's something inside it." I heard him exhale, sharp, like he'd been holding that breath since Carol's phone call reached him. "What is it?" His voice cracked slightly on the second word. "Mom, what did she throw away?" I told him then, slowly, plainly, the way Frank would have wanted it told. No drama, no performance, just the truth laid out the way you'd lay out fabric before cutting it. I told him about the Patience Fund, about the $200,000 his father had saved, quietly, for 40 years, never touched, not even when the roof leaked or the car broke down. I told him it belonged to Lily, and only Lily, the moment she turned 18. I told him about the notarized letter, the legal pouch, the hidden seam I'd sewn by hand with my own 2 aching fingers. I told him about his father's letter, the one with the line that had stayed folded in my memory for 3 years. If anyone ever calls this blanket worthless, hold on to it tighter. There was silence on the other end, a long one. I could hear, faintly, that he had sat down somewhere. A chair creaking, the particular quiet of a man absorbing something too large to stand up under. "She threw it in the trash," he finally said, almost to himself. "I watched her do it. I watched you pick it back up, and I just stood there." "You did," I said. I did not say it to wound him. I said it because it was true, and because I think, somewhere underneath the shock, he needed someone to say it plainly. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice rose now, not at me, I don't think, but at himself. "Why didn't you say something? Mom, she could have actually thrown it away. The truck could have come Monday morning and it would have just been gone. $200,000 gone? Because nobody knew." "Because your father didn't want it announced," I said gently. "He wanted it earned. He wanted it found by people who deserved to find it, not handed out like a prize at a party." "But I almost let her throw away Dad's last—" His voice broke fully there, and I heard, on the other end of that phone, my grown son begin to cry the way he hadn't cried in front of me since he was a boy, with a broken window and a flimsy excuse about wind. "I should have said something," he said, voice thick now, words coming faster, messier. "At the party. I saw her face when she opened it. I saw your face. I knew. I didn't know what I knew, but I knew something wasn't right, and I just stood there because I didn't want to make things tense with her in front of everyone. I've been doing that for years, Mom, just standing there, letting it go. I told myself it was keeping the peace, but it was never peace. It was just me being scared." I let him say it all. I did not interrupt. I did not comfort him too quickly, the way I might have when he was small, because I think some shame needs room to be fully felt before it can turn into something useful. He kept going, the words spilling now like something that had been dammed up far longer than just this one weekend. "Remember the stuffing? Thanksgiving? A couple years back?" he asked. And I was surprised he remembered it too. That small moment I'd thought only I had noticed. "She said it was old-fashioned, and I ate faster. I didn't say a word. And then there was the time she said your hair looked very practical for your birthday, like that was a compliment. And I laughed along with her because I didn't want to start something. And the wedding photos, she wanted to redo the seating chart so her coworkers weren't near you and Aunt Linda because she said you'd bring the energy down. I told her that was ridiculous in my head. Out loud, I just moved the seating chart." He laughed once, a broken, humorless sound. "I've been moving seating charts for 4 years, Mom. Little ones. I told myself none of them mattered enough to fight about. And maybe none of them did, on their own. But I think I just taught her that nothing about you was worth defending. I think I did that. Not her. Me." "You didn't build that on your own," I said quietly. "She came into this with her own ideas about what things are worth. But you're right that you let those ideas sit unchallenged longer than you should have." "What happens now?" he asked, and there was something almost young in the way he asked it, the way he used to ask me what happens now after a scraped knee or a bad grade, or the time he wrecked his first car, looking for the next step, looking for his mother to know it. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "I need to think. Your father left very clear instructions about what's supposed to happen with this money, and I intend to follow them exactly. But how we handle the rest of it, Vanessa, the family, what gets said and to who, that I haven't decided." "Whatever you decide," he said, "I'm not staying quiet this time. I mean that, Mom. I should have said something on Saturday. I'm not going to make that mistake again." "I'm glad to hear it," I said, and I was. But I also know my son well enough to know that words spoken in the wreckage of a guilty night are easy to mean and harder to keep. I did not say that part out loud. I simply let him sit with his own promise, the way you let a seam set before you test its strength. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said one more time, quieter now, worn down to something raw. "I know," I said. "Get some sleep, Daniel." For the first time in years, I heard spine in my son's voice. I did not sleep much that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, turning slow circles above me, thinking about Frank, thinking about Daniel's broken voice on the phone, thinking about what it would mean to do this the right way instead of the easy way. I want to be honest with you about something. There was a small, tired part of me that night that wanted to make it simple. Call Vanessa myself. Tell her exactly what she'd thrown in that trash bin. Let her sit with the shame of it the way Daniel was sitting with his. Some petty corner of my heart even pictured her face when she understood. And I will admit, there was a flicker of satisfaction in that picture. I pictured her reaching for her phone the way she reaches for it after everything, and finding for once that there was no caption clever enough to soften what she'd done. I let myself sit in that picture longer than I'm proud of. I thought about calling Carol back and asking her to spread the truth the same easy way she'd spread the rumor. Let it travel through the family the way gossip travels, fast and merciless, until Vanessa heard it from 6 different mouths before she ever heard it from mine. I thought about waiting until the next family gathering and simply announcing it cold, in front of everyone, the way she'd opened that gift in front of everyone. An eye for an eye has its own ugly comfort. I understood that night exactly why people reach for it. I did not trust that flicker. Frank used to say anger makes a very convincing argument and a very poor plan, and he was right about that the way he was right about most things. I got up at nearly 2 a.m, made tea I didn't finish, and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd sewn that blanket, until the satisfaction wore off and something steadier took its place. I remember looking at my own hands in the dim kitchen light, the same hands that had stitched that hidden seam so carefully, and asking myself plainly, would Frank recognize this plan? Would he recognize me if I let this become about winning instead of about Lily? He would not have. I knew that the moment I asked it. By morning, I had decided on 3 things, and I held to all 3 of them in the weeks that followed. The first was this. Lily would receive exactly what her grandfather intended on exactly the timeline he intended, with no changes and no exceptions. Frank had written everything down with a lawyer 2 years before he died, a man named Mr. Castellano, still practicing 2 towns over, still kept Frank's file in his cabinet exactly as Frank had left it. I called him Monday morning, my hands a little unsteady on the phone, and his office called me back that same afternoon with an opening. His office was small and old-fashioned in a way I found comforting. Wood paneling, a secretary who still used a paper appointment book, no music playing in the waiting room, just the quiet tick of a clock that had probably been there as long as the building itself. Mr. Castellano remembered Frank well. He told me, settling into the chair across from me with Frank's thick manila folder open on his desk, that Frank had come to him not once, but 3 separate times over those final months, each visit adjusting some small detail, making sure the language was airtight, making sure there was no gap anyone could slip through. "Most people come in once and call it done," Mr. Castellano said, turning a page of the file slowly. "Your husband came in 3 times. He said he didn't want anyone to ever be able to argue with what he'd built, not legally, not emotionally. He wanted it settled so completely that arguing wouldn't even be worth trying." Hearing that, sitting in that quiet office with the clock ticking, and Frank's careful handwriting visible on the page upside down across the desk from me, undid something in me that the backyard hadn't managed to undo. I cried there too, briefly, the second time in 3 days, and Mr. Castellano simply waited, the way good men wait, without rushing me toward composure I wasn't ready for yet. He confirmed the letter, and the documents were intact, still sealed exactly as Frank had left them, untouched by anything that had happened in that backyard. The second decision was harder. I decided the money itself would never be used as a weapon. Not against Vanessa, not even to teach her a lesson she very much needed taught. Frank's money was for his granddaughter, not for settling scores with her mother. If I let it become ammunition, I would be doing exactly what Vanessa had done, turning something sacred into something transactional, something used to win a moment instead of honor a life. The third decision was about the family itself, and this one I sat with longest. I decided the truth needed to be told to everyone together, all at once, in a setting where no camera could turn it into something performed rather than something felt. Not a phone call, not a quiet aside between Daniel and Vanessa behind closed doors, where the story could be softened, edited, made smaller than it actually was. The humiliation had happened in front of 40 people. The truth, I decided, would be told in front of the people who actually mattered, our own small family, around our own small table, where things are said plainly because there's nowhere else for them to hide. I also made one more decision, smaller than the others but important to me. I decided I would not raise my voice when the moment came. I would not list every slight, every dismissive comment, every small unkindness I had quietly absorbed over 4 years of being Vanessa's mother-in-law. This was not the moment for an accounting of grievances. This was the moment for a single, clear truth to be laid on the table and left there, plain as the blanket itself, for everyone to look at honestly. Before I left his office, I asked Mr. Castellano one more question, one that had been turning over in me since Daniel's call. Was there a way to protect the trust further? Not because I doubted its legal standing, but because I wanted Vanessa to understand, in clear and permanent terms, that this was never hers to question, manage, or influence, now or in 18 years. He confirmed what Frank had already built so carefully. An independent trustee, separate from the family, would oversee the funds until Lily came of age. No one in the family, not me, not Daniel, not Vanessa, would ever have signing authority over a single dollar of it. It was, in a strange way, exactly the kind of justice Frank would have wanted. Not loud, not vindictive, simply unmovable, like a fact that doesn't need to raise its voice to remain true. I drove home that afternoon with the folder Mr. Castellano had copied for me sitting on the passenger seat in almost the exact same spot the blanket had sat 3 days earlier. I sat with that thought for a long while after I parked in my driveway, turning Frank's old wedding ring on my finger the way I do when I need to feel close to him. Mercy and consequence can sit at the same table. I called the family together the following Sunday. I did not say much when I called each of them, just that I wanted everyone at my house for dinner, that it was important, that I would appreciate it if they came without too many questions beforehand. Daniel knew, of course. He had known since that Sunday night phone call, but he kept his promise and said nothing more to Vanessa than what I asked him to say, that his mother wanted the family together. I spent Saturday cleaning my house the way I used to clean it before holidays, back when Frank was alive, and we hosted every Easter and every 4th of July without fail. I dusted shelves that didn't need dusting. I ironed a tablecloth I hadn't used since his funeral. There is something about preparing a home for a hard conversation that feels almost like preparing it for a guest of honor, and in a way, I suppose I was. Frank's letter was the guest of honor that night, even if no one but me knew it yet. I cooked the way I cook for people I love, a pot roast that had been simmering since morning, the kind of meal that fills a house with a smell thick enough to soften even a tense room. I made the same buttered rolls I'd made every Sunday of Daniel's childhood. I do not think I did this consciously to comfort anyone, but looking back, I think some old instinct in me knew that truth lands gentler on a full stomach than an empty one. I placed the blanket in the center of my kitchen table, folded neatly, the brown paper smoothed flat beside it the way it had looked the day Vanessa first lifted it from the gift table. I did not hide it under a napkin or set it aside until the right moment. I wanted it sitting there from the second anyone walked in, plain and unavoidable, the way the truth itself was about to be. Daniel arrived first, alone, and helped me set the table without being asked, which told me more about where his head was than anything he could have said out loud. He glanced at the blanket on the table more than once, his jaw tight, his hands a little restless the way they get when he's nervous. "Are you ready for this?" he asked quietly, setting the last fork down. "I've been ready for 3 years," I told him. "I just didn't know the day yet." Vanessa arrived 20 minutes later, with Daniel's sister Linda and her husband close behind, all of them carrying the small, confused energy of people who'd been told only that something mattered, not what. Vanessa hugged me at the door, a little stiffly, the way you hug someone after a conflict you haven't fully named yet. "Hi, Maggie," she said. "Thank you for having us. I wanted to apologize again about— We'll talk about all of it tonight," I said gently, before she could finish smoothing it into something small. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." We ate first. I insisted on that. Some truths deserve to wait until the table is cleared, until the small talk has run its course, until everyone has had a chance to simply be a family together before being asked to face something difficult as one. "This roast is incredible, Maggie," Linda said, reaching for a second roll. "You have to give me this recipe one of these days." "It's the same one I've made for 30 years, I said. "No secret to it, just patience and a low oven." Vanessa smiled at that, a small, easy smile, though I noticed her eyes drift again toward the blanket sitting at the center of the table, plain and folded, impossible to ignore now that she was looking for a reason to be uneasy. "I keep meaning to ask," she said, trying to sound casual. "Why is that here? On the table, I mean." "We'll get to it," I said simply, and passed her the green beans. She took the green beans. She did not ask again, but I noticed she ate a little slower after that, the way people eat when their stomach has quietly stopped being hungry, but their hands keep moving out of habit. Linda picked up on the shift in the room first. She always has, even as a girl, the one who noticed when Frank had had a hard day at the factory before he'd said a single word about it. She glanced at me, then at Daniel, then back at the folded blanket, and something in her face went still and watchful. "Is everything okay, Mom?" she asked quietly, setting her fork down. "You've been kind of quiet tonight." "Everyone's fine," I said. "I just want us to talk about something together once we're done eating, as a family." "About the shower?" Vanessa asked, and I heard the smallest crack of nervousness slide into her voice now, the casual tone starting to thin at the edges. "Maggie, I really am sorry about how that went. I felt bad about it all week. I didn't mean for it to come across the way it did. Let's finish dinner first," I said again, gently but firmly, and I watched her nod and pick her fork back up, though her eyes kept drifting back to that plain brown paper-edged blanket sitting in the center of the table like a held breath. When the plates were finally cleared and the coffee was poured, the kitchen settled into the particular quiet that comes right before something important is about to be said. Linda looked between Daniel and me, sensing it first, her hands folding together on the table the way they do when she's bracing for news. Vanessa set her coffee cup down slowly, her smile fading into something more uncertain, her gaze fixed now, fully, on the blanket she could no longer pretend not to notice. "Maggie," she said quietly, "what is this about?" I reached across the table and rested my hand flat on the folded blanket, feeling even now that small, invisible ridge beneath the fabric where Frank's last words to his granddaughter had waited patiently for 3 long years. I looked at each of them once, slowly, the way you look at a room before you begin a story that matters. I put my hand on the object and said, "Now we open it properly." The kitchen went very still. Even the coffee pot, still gurgling faintly on the counter behind me, seemed to quiet itself for what came next. "Maggie," Vanessa said again, her voice smaller now. "What do you mean, open it properly?" I did not answer right away. I unfolded the blanket slowly across the table, smoothing it flat the way I had 100 times in my sewing room, the pale yellow flannel catching the kitchen light, the little blue ducks along the border looking, for the first time in front of this family, exactly as cared for as they actually were. "Your father-in-law made something with me 3 years before he died," I said, looking at Daniel and Linda both. "He didn't tell either of you. He barely told me everything at once. He gave me pieces of it, over months, the way he gave everyone everything, slowly, so it would last." I turned the blanket over and ran my finger along the hidden seam, the one only a tailor's eye could ever find unprompted. There's a pocket sewn into this lining, right here. I sewed it myself by hand the same week I finished the ducks. Linda leaned forward, her brow furrowed, reaching out one finger to touch the fabric where I'd pointed, almost like she didn't fully believe it until she could feel the ridge herself. A pocket? For what? I reached into the seam with 2 fingers, working it open along the small thread I'd left loose on purpose for exactly this moment, and I drew out the thin, waterproof pouch Frank had given me 3 years before. The room watched it come out the way you'd watch something emerge from water, slow, suspended, impossible to look away from. I set it on the table next to the empty coffee cups. Nobody reached for it. They simply looked at it, the way you look at something you sense is heavier than its size suggests. Inside this, I said, is a notarized letter from your father Daniel, and documents for an account he opened over 40 years ago, back before either of you were born, and added to every single month without ever once spending from it. Not when the roof leaked, not when the truck broke down. He called it his patience fund. I opened the pouch carefully and laid the contents on the table, one piece at a time, the way you'd lay out fabric before cutting it, giving each piece its own moment to be seen. First, the folded legal letter from Mr. Castellano's office, 3 pages, dense with the kind of careful language lawyers use when they want no room left for argument, Frank's signature at the bottom in handwriting that had grown shaky in his final months, but never once lost its certainty. Then, the account documents themselves. Linda picked these up first, scanning the header, the account number, the institution's name, her lips moving slightly as she read. "This is a real account," she said quietly, mostly to herself. "This isn't... Mom, this is an actual current account." "It's been verified twice," I said, "once by Mr. Castellano, once by the bank itself, just last month, and beneath those, a second envelope, smaller, softer at the corners from handling, with Frank's own handwriting on the front. For my first grandchild." Daniel's hand moved toward that envelope before he seemed to realize he was reaching for it. He stopped himself just short of touching it, glancing at me first, as if asking permission. "Not yet," I said gently. "That comes later tonight. I want you to sit with the rest of it first." He nodded, his hand returning to his lap, though his eyes stayed fixed on his father's handwriting like he couldn't quite pull them away. "Mom," Daniel said quietly, though he already knew, the words coming out more for the others than for himself. "How much is in it?" $206,000, I said. "As of last month's statement, it belongs to Lily. Only Lily. The moment she turns 18, not a day before, and not to anyone else, ever, under any circumstance. Your father made sure of that, with a lawyer, 3 separate times before he passed." The silence that followed was different from the silence in that backyard. That silence had been careless, a room not paying attention. This silence was the opposite. Every single person at that table, fully present, fully understanding, all at once, exactly what had nearly slipped through their fingers. Vanessa's hand had come up to cover her mouth. Her eyes were fixed on the pouch, on the documents, on the small, worn envelope with Frank's handwriting, and I watched something shift behind her face. Not performance this time, nothing arranged for a camera, just a woman realizing, slowly and completely, what she had actually held in her hands 2 weeks earlier. She reached out toward the account documents, then pulled her hand back, as though she didn't feel she had the right to touch them anymore. "That was in the blanket," she said, almost to herself. "The one I—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Everyone at that table finished it silently in their own minds. Linda's husband, who had stayed quiet through most of dinner, exhaled slowly and sat back in his chair, shaking his head. "Frank," he said softly, like he was speaking to an old friend rather than a memory. "Of course he did something like this. Of course." $200,000, Linda repeated, staring at the documents like they might rearrange themselves into something easier to believe. "Mom, this whole time you were just carrying that around? At the party? In your purse, basically?" "In my arms," I said. "The whole way home." The kitchen clock on the wall ticked through several long seconds, nobody speaking, nobody quite ready to be the next voice in the room. I let that silence stretch longer than was comfortable, longer than I might have allowed in an ordinary conversation, because I wanted every person there to feel the full weight of it before I gave them anywhere else to put their attention. Vanessa's eyes were wet now, though she hadn't said anything more. Daniel's jaw was tight, his hands flat on the table on either side of his father's letter, not touching it, just guarding it. I looked directly at Vanessa then, not with anger, but with a steadiness I had been gathering for 3 years, and especially for the last 2 weeks. "This is what you threw in the trash," I said, "because it did not match your aesthetic." Vanessa sat very still for a moment after I said it, her eyes still on the documents, and when she finally looked up at me, I could see her trying to find footing on ground that had just shifted under her completely. "Maggie, how was I supposed to know there was something inside it?" she said, her voice unsteady but rising slightly, the way voices rise when someone is reaching for solid ground that isn't there. "I didn't know. Nobody told me. If you'd just said something at the party, I never would have." "I know you didn't know," I said calmly. "Nobody is angry with you for not knowing what was sewn inside a blanket. That was never the point." She blinked, caught off guard by that, and for a moment the room waited to see where she would go next. "Then what is the point?" she asked. "I feel like I'm being punished for something I had no way of predicting." "You're not being punished for not knowing," I said. "You're being shown something about how you treated it before you knew." The kitchen was quiet enough that I could hear the clock again, ticking through the silence while Vanessa tried to absorb that distinction. "I was just trying to keep things organized for the photos," she said. And I heard, even as she said it, the words sounding smaller in her own mouth than they probably had in her head. "It wasn't about the gift specifically. I do that with everything. I always have a system for—" "You talked over me 3 times, I said gently, not sharply, simply stating it the way you'd state a measurement. "I tried to tell you I'd made it myself. I tried to tell you there was something I wanted you to know about it. You didn't let me finish a single sentence." She opened her mouth, then closed it. "You called it a thrift store find in front of 40 people, I continued, still calm, still steady. "You said it wasn't breathable enough, in the same breath as praising a swaddle set because a doctor mentioned its brand name, and then you dropped it in a trash can 3 feet away from me, and you turned back to your chair before I'd even stood up to retrieve it." "It was for the party," she said, quieter now. "I had a whole aesthetic planned. It wasn't— Maggie, it wasn't personal. I wasn't trying to hurt you." "I believe that," I said, and I meant it. "I don't think you woke up that morning wanting to hurt me. But not meaning to hurt someone doesn't undo the hurt. And it doesn't change what you actually did, which was decide in front of a room full of people that something didn't deserve a second look because it didn't come wrapped the way you expected." Daniel shifted in his seat beside her, and I watched him glance toward me, then toward his wife, his hands still resting near his father's letter. "It was just a joke, kind of," Vanessa tried again, though her voice had lost most of its conviction by now. "The vintage comment. I didn't mean it as an insult. I say things like that about my own mom's stuff all the time." "I'm sure you do," I said. "But I want you to hear something, and I'm not saying it to be cruel. You were not punished for not knowing what was inside that blanket. You were exposed for how you treated it before you knew." The room sat with that for a moment. I watched it land on her slowly, the way truth sometimes lands. Not all at once, but in pieces, each one settling a little deeper than the last. "That's not fair," she said, but there was no real fight left in it. It came out more like a question than an argument, like she was testing whether the words still held any weight once she said them out loud. "It is fair," Linda said quietly, surprising all of us, her voice gentle but firm. "Vanessa, I love you, but you do that. You did it with the seating chart at your own wedding. You do it with gifts, with how people dress, with whose house looks put together enough to post. You've been doing it for years, and most of us have just let it slide because it felt easier than saying anything. Vanessa's eyes filled, and this time she didn't try to hide it or smile through it for anyone watching. There was no camera in this kitchen. There was no audience to perform composure for. "I didn't realize," she said softly, "that it looked like that from the outside." "It did," I said. "It does." Nobody rushed to fill the silence that followed. Daniel didn't reach for his wife's hand right away, and Vanessa didn't reach for an excuse. For the first time since I'd known her, she simply sat there and let a hard truth exist in the room without trying to manage it, soften it, or turn it into something more flattering. I let that silence stand exactly as long as it needed to. After the silence had held long enough, I gathered the documents back together gently, squaring their edges the way I square fabric before cutting it, and I set them in a small stack at the center of the table, the blanket still spread open beneath them. "I want to tell you all exactly how this is going to work," I said, "so there's no confusion later and no room for anyone to wonder." I looked at each of them in turn as I spoke, the way Frank used to look at people when he wanted them to understand he meant every word plainly. "This money belongs to Lily. It is held in a trust your father set up years ago with an independent trustee. Not me, not Daniel, not anyone in this family, managing it until she turns 18. No one can borrow against it. No one can adjust it. No one can ask for an exception, not for a medical bill, not for a down payment, not for any emergency, no matter how real or how urgent it feels in the moment. Your father built it that way on purpose, and I intend to honor that exactly as he wrote it." Daniel nodded slowly. I don't think he'd expected anything different, but I wanted it said clearly anyway, in front of everyone, so there would never be a quiet moment later where someone could claim they hadn't understood. "As for the blanket itself," I continued, "it stays with me, for now. I'll keep the letter safe until Lily is old enough to read it herself, and I'll keep the blanket folded in my cedar chest, the same place I keep your father's good suit and the quilt my mother made me as a wedding gift. When the time is right, when Lily is old enough to understand what it means, not just what it's worth, I'll give it to her myself, and I'll tell her the whole story, exactly as it happened, the making of it, the party, all of it." "All of it?" Vanessa asked quietly, and I understood what she was really asking. "All of it," I said, not unkindly. "I'm not interested in protecting anyone's image in the telling, including my own. Lily deserves the true story, not a softened one. But I'm also not interested in turning her into a weapon against her mother. She'll hear what happened. She'll also hear that her mother sat at this table and listened, and didn't argue her way out of it. That matters too, in the story. I intend to tell that part honestly as well." I saw something ease slightly in Vanessa's shoulders at that. Not relief exactly, but something close to it. The small grace of being told that a hard truth would be told fairly rather than used against her forever. "There's one more thing," I said, and this part I had thought about carefully in the days leading up to that dinner. "I don't want this money to become something whispered about or fought over in this family. It's not a secret anymore, but it's also not a topic for every holiday from here forward. It belongs to Lily. It was never about proving anyone right or wrong. I'd like us to let it rest now, the way your father intended it to rest for 40 years before this." Linda reached over and squeezed my hand on the table. "That sounds fair, Mom." Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup slowly between her palms, and when she finally spoke, her voice had lost the polish it usually carried, the practiced brightness she wore the way other people wear perfume. "Can I say something?" she asked, looking not at me, but at Daniel first, and then back at me. "Of course," I said. "I think I owe you more than an apology," she said slowly, choosing her words with more care than I'd ever heard from her. "I think I owe you actually listening, going forward, when you try to tell me something matters, not just about gifts, about anything." She paused, glancing down at the blanket still spread across the table. "I didn't let you finish a sentence that whole afternoon. I keep thinking about that. Not the money. That. It was the first thing she'd said all evening that didn't sound like it was reaching for an exit. I'd like that, I said simply. Starting now would be a good place to begin. Daniel, beside her, finally reached over and took her hand, and for the first time that night, I watched my son speak without hesitation, without checking the room first to see if it was safe. I want to apologize too, he said, looking between his wife and me. Not just for the party, for all the small times before it, where I should have said something and didn't. I'm done doing that. Nobody clapped, nobody needed to. The kitchen simply held that promise quietly, the way a room holds something true. After a while, I reached for the small envelope still resting on the table, the one with Frank's handwriting on the front, soft at the corners from 3 years of careful handling, for my first grandchild. I think it's time, I said quietly. Daniel nodded. Linda's hand found her husband's. Vanessa sat very still, her eyes already wet again, watching me the way you watch something you know is about to matter. I opened the envelope slowly, my hands not quite steady, and unfolded the single page inside. Frank's handwriting filled it edge to edge, slanted and careful. The handwriting of a man who pressed hard on the pen because he wanted to be sure his words would last. I cleared my throat, and I read it to them exactly as he wrote it. To my first grandchild, I will not get to meet you, and I have made my peace with that, though it took me longer than I expected. What I want you to know instead is this. I started saving for you before I knew your name, before I even knew you'd be a girl or a boy, before your mother and father had even met each other. I did not save quickly. I am not a man who believes in quick things. I put a little aside every month for over 40 years, and I never touched it. Not once, no matter how hard a year got. I wanted you to have something that grew the way good things grow. Slow, steady, and untouched by panic. Your grandmother is the only person who knows about this. I trusted her with it, the way I trusted her with everything in our 40 years together, because she understands something most people never learn, that the most valuable things rarely announce themselves. They sit quietly. They wait. They are recognized only by the people patient enough to look closely. I asked her to hide this inside something she made with her own hands, because I wanted my gift to you to come wrapped in hers. 2 kinds of patience, folded into one. If anyone ever calls this blanket worthless, hold on to it tighter. The people who cannot see value are usually the ones who need to be taught it most. I hope, by the time you read this, you already know the difference between what something costs and what it's worth. If you don't yet, I hope this teaches you. Money fades. Trends fade. What lasts is usually quiet. Patience, family, the people who show up for you in small, steady ways instead of loud, easy ones. Take care of your grandmother. She gave everything to this family without ever once asking for credit. Take care of your father, too, even when he's quiet in ways that frustrate you. He learned that quiet from me, and I am still learning, even now, that quiet is not always strength. Sometimes it just needs a little courage added to it. I love you already, more than I have words for, and I have never met you. Your grandfather, Frank. I folded the letter back along its worn crease when I finished, and for a long moment nobody in that kitchen said anything at all. Linda was crying freely now, no longer trying to hide it. Her husband had his arm around her shoulders. Daniel sat with his head bowed slightly, his hand still in Vanessa's, his shoulders shaking just slightly with the kind of crying men do when they've spent years not letting themselves. Vanessa was crying too, but differently than the others. Quieter, more inward, the kind of crying that comes when something shifts permanently in how a person sees the world. She wasn't looking at the documents anymore, or the trust paperwork, or even the blanket. She was looking at nothing in particular, the way people look when they're somewhere deep inside their own thoughts. He never told me any of that, Daniel finally said, his voice thick. 40 years. He never said a word. He didn't want it known until it mattered, I said softly. He wanted it to arrive exactly when it was needed, not a moment before. Vanessa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, an unguarded gesture. Nothing practiced about it. I keep thinking about the part where he says the people who can't see value are usually the ones who need to be taught it most, she said quietly. I think he was talking about me before he ever met me. I don't think he was talking about you specifically, I said gently. I think he was talking about anyone who hasn't learned that lesson yet. He just happened to be right about how it would land tonight. She let out a small, watery laugh at that, the first real laugh I'd heard from her all evening, soft and a little surprised at itself. I reached over and rested my hand on top of hers, the same hand that had once dropped my blanket so carelessly into a trash bin, and for the first time since I'd known her, the gesture felt entirely welcome on both sides. He would have liked you, eventually, I told her honestly. He had a habit of being patient with people, too. 6 months have passed since that night at my kitchen table, and I think it's only fair to tell you what came after, because endings matter just as much as beginnings, even in stories like this one. The trust sits exactly where Frank left it. Mr. Castellano sends me a brief statement every quarter, more out of courtesy than necessity, since there is truly nothing for any of us to manage. The independent trustee handles everything according to the original documents, untouched and unchanged, exactly the way Frank intended. Lily will turn 18 in 17.5 years, and on that day, she will receive a letter from a grandfather she never met, along with more patience folded into dollars than most people see saved in a lifetime. Vanessa changed, though I want to be honest with you and say it wasn't an instant transformation, the kind you sometimes see in stories where one hard conversation fixes everything overnight. Real change is slower than that, the way Frank always said real things tend to be. She started small. The week after that dinner she called me, not Daniel, not through a text, but called me herself, and asked if she could come by and learn how to hem a pair of pants that needed shortening. I don't think she actually needed the pants hemmed. I think she needed a reason to sit across from me at my own table, on her own, without an audience, without a camera, without anything to perform. We've done that a handful of times since. She is not, and I suspect will never be, a woman who sews for pleasure the way I do. But she has started noticing things she didn't notice before. Last month, at Linda's birthday, she complimented a hand-knit scarf Linda's mother-in-law had made, and she meant it. I could tell, because she asked questions about the pattern instead of simply moving past it toward the next gift. She still runs her online business. She still curates her photos carefully. I don't expect that part of her to disappear, and honestly, I've made peace with not needing it to. But she started posting things now and then that don't quite fit her usual aesthetic. A slightly crooked birthday cake Lily helped decorate with too much frosting, captioned simply, "Perfect because she made it, not because it's pretty." I noticed that caption. I think she meant for me too. Daniel has changed more than I expected, and in ways that have surprised even him, I think. He calls me more often now, not out of obligation, but to talk. Really talk. The way he used to, before he got so careful about keeping the peace at any cost. He told me a few weeks ago that he'd finally said something to Vanessa's mother at a family dinner, gently but plainly, when she made an offhand comment about a friend's cheap home renovation. He said it surprised everyone at the table, including himself. "I used to think keeping quiet was kindness," he told me on the phone that night. "I'm starting to understand it was just easier. There's a difference." Lily turned 1 last month. We had a small party. No balloon arch, no custom backdrop, no photographer chasing the perfect angle. Just family, in my backyard this time, with a sheet cake from the bakery down the street and paper plates that didn't match anything in particular. I gave her a small gift that day, too. Nothing hidden in it this time, just a soft little cardigan I made myself, simple yellow buttons down the front. Vanessa took a photo of Lily wearing it, and I noticed, scrolling through it later when she sent it to me, that she'd posted it without any filter, without any careful staging. Just Lily, in a handmade cardigan, laughing at something just out of frame. The caption said only, "Made by Grandma, my favorite thing she owns." I keep the blanket folded in my cedar chest, exactly where I told them I would, resting beside Frank's good suit and my mother's wedding quilt. Sometimes on quiet afternoons, I take it out just to hold it, to run my fingers once more along that flat, invisible seam, and to remember that the most important things rarely look important while they're happening. I think about that backyard often still. The balloon arch, the gold script spelling out a name, the trash bin sitting so close to the gift table that no one ever thought twice about it. I think about how easy it would have been for that whole story to end differently. For Carol to have never mentioned that small joke to my sister, for my sister's husband to have never repeated it over coffee, for Daniel to have never made that call on a Sunday night. So much of what mattered most almost slipped away simply because nobody knew to look twice at something plain. That is the part I want to leave you with, more than the money, more than the trust, more than anything that happened at my kitchen table that night. Handmade things carry something store-bought. Things rarely do. Hours nobody saw, patience nobody clapped for, love that doesn't announce itself with a logo or a price tag. The world we live in now is loud about value. It tells us, every single day, in 100 small ways, that worth can be measured in brand names and follower counts and how something photographs in good light. But I have lived 68 years, and I have learned slowly, the way you learn most important things, that the loudest claims about value are rarely the truest ones. My husband Frank knew that better than anyone I've ever known. He spent 40 years proving it without ever once raising his voice about it. What lasts is usually quiet, he used to say. And he was right, the way he was right about almost everything that mattered. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this: never let anyone convince you that what you made with your own hands out of your own time is worth less than something bought in a hurry to look impressive for an afternoon. The blanket in that trash bin wasn't cheap. It never was. It just took someone willing to look past the wrapping to understand that. And if you are the one doing the looking, if you are young, busy, building a life that moves fast and looks good in photographs, I hope you'll remember Vanessa's lesson too, the one she learned at my kitchen table, the hard way, the way most real lessons get learned. Slow down long enough to actually see the people in front of you, especially the quiet ones, especially the ones who don't perform their love loudly. They are often holding more than you realize. I still have that blanket. I imagine I always will. And one day, when Lily is old enough, I'll fold it into her hands myself, and I'll tell her the whole story exactly as it happened. The good parts and the hard parts both. I think that's what her grandfather would have wanted most. Not a perfect story, a true one. If you've ever had something you made with your own hands dismissed, mocked, or thrown away by someone who couldn't see its worth, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. I read every single one, and if this story meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. There are more stories like this one waiting to be told.